Welcome to today's deep dive. I'm really glad you could join us today because we are getting into a completely fascinating document. It is simply titled Baptism and Public Confession.
Yeah, it's a great read.
It really is. And right out of the gate, we should probably clarify our mission for today's conversation. We're delving into the source material to explore a very specific pivotal threshold.
Right, that moment of transition.
Exactly. The moment where a highly private inward conviction steps out into the light and becomes a public, visible allegiance. So we aren't just taking a look at a religious ritual today. The material actually presents a profound exploration of the psychology and the theology of identity formation.
It's a deeply compelling read, honestly, regardless of your personal background or your prior knowledge of the subject. The material doesn't just stop at explaining what baptism is from a biblical perspective. It builds this really robust case for why the physical, tangible act of public confession is framed as well, a completely non-negotiable architectural pillar of Christian discipleship. We're going to explore the historical context, the theological foundations, and even some neurological arguments presented for why this ancient practice carries so much weight.
Okay, let's unpack this because there is a massive central tension set up right away. We live in a modern Western world that treats spirituality as the ultimate personalized preference.
Oh, totally. It's highly individualized.
Right. It's supposed to be an internal monologue. It's supposed to be unobtrusive and polite. But this ancient text insists that unexpressed faith is, by definition, underdeveloped faith. The core argument here is that internal transformation was just never meant to remain hidden.
It is a direct challenge to that modern impulse we all have to compartmentalize our lives into these neat little private and public folders. Keeping belief entirely in the shadows might feel safe for you, but the argument here is that secrecy actually makes that belief incredibly fragile. And there's a story included in the text to illustrate this perfectly. It involves this young professional who firmly insisted that his faith was a private matter. He explicitly stated he didn't need to make a spectacle of his beliefs in front of a crowd.
Which, I mean, sounds like a very reasonable, culturally sensible position today. Most of us would probably nod along and say, sure, keep it to yourself, that's your truth.
Right.
But the story doesn't end there. Months later, this same man is standing waist deep in baptismal waters in front of his entire church community. His voice is shaking as he shares his story, and he experiences this massive psychological shift.
Yeah, the text notes he later explained that he hadn't realized how much of his life was still quietly negotiating with his old identity.
Negotiating with his old identity, that's such a striking phrase.
It really is. And it was only when he spoke it publicly that the negotiations finally stopped.
That line about stopping the negotiations is crucial to understanding the underlying premise here.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, baptism isn't framed as a simple contract in the source material. It operates as a covenant. And even in completely secular society, we universally understand the power of public commitments. We rely on physical, witnessed acts to cement major life transitions all the time.
Right, like standing up and exchanging marriage vows in front of your family or swearing a citizenship oath.
Exactly.
Or even signing a legally binding mortgage document in front of a notary. We intuitively know that public affirmations fundamentally alter the reality of the relationship. It burns the ships, so to speak.
Precisely. And in the biblical narrative, covenants are never just abstract promises floating in the ether. They always feature highly visible physical signs.
Tangible markers.
Yes. The source material traces this pattern clearly. After the flood with Noah, the covenant sign was the rainbow. For Abraham, it was the physical mark of circumcision. For the nation of Israel escaping Egypt, it was the shared Passover meal.
So these weren't optional decorations.
No, they were the seal on the agreement.
And baptism functions as the sign of the new covenant. It marks a believer's entry into a multi-ethnic people. It's a literal line drawn in the water that establishes a definitive before and after.
Yeah.
Which brings up an interesting question for you, listening to this right now. Think about your own life and the commitments you've made. How does putting an intention out into the open change your relationship to it?
It changes everything.
Right. When you finally declare a life change to the people around you, whether it's a career pivot, a relationship, or a deeply held belief, it somehow makes that transformation durable. You can't quietly back out through the side door anymore.
And the material suggests that this public accountability is a feature, not a bug. Externalizing the belief makes it tangible. It forces the internal reality to face the external world.
But you can't have this public covenant without the physical medium itself. The author spends a lot of time on the actual element of water, and here's where it gets really interesting.
The water paradox.
Yes. In our daily lives, water is just the stuff we drink or shower in. But in the biblical imagination, water is entirely paradoxical. It is never just a neutral background element. It is a force of terrifying chaos, but also the canvas of creation.
It brings absolute judgment, but also profound mercy.
It's wild to think about it that way.
It's a duality that permeates ancient literature, and the source synthesizes this by tracing 4 major water narratives throughout the Bible. First, looking back to the very beginning in Genesis, we see the Spirit of God hovering over the dark, chaotic, unformed waters.
Right.
In this ancient context, the deep ocean was a symbol of terror and nothingness. Yet God brings order and life directly out of that watery chaos.
Then we hit the story of Noah and the flood. And this is where that duality really sharpens. The water acts as a destructive judgment on global corruption. It wipes out everything.
He does.
But simultaneously, it is the very medium that lifts the ark and preserves Noah and the remnant. The same water that destroys is the water that saves.
That tension continues in the book of Exodus with the crossing of the Red Sea. In this narrative, water is the instrument of ultimate liberation. The Israelites pass through the parted waters, escaping centuries of slavery.
And then the crash.
Exactly. Those same waters crash down and literally swallow the Egyptian army, dealing a final blow to their oppressors. It's a watery grave for the oppressor and a birth canal for a newly freed nation.
The fourth narrative mentioned is the crossing of the Jordan River in the book of Joshua. The waters part again, but this time they act as a threshold.
Yes.
The Israelites step out of decades of wandering in the wilderness, cross through the river, and step onto the soil of their promised inheritance.
When you pull all 4 of these threads together, you get a much richer picture of what is actually happening in a baptism. Stepping into those waters isn't some New Testament novelty that Jesus just invented out of thin air.
It's connected to all of it.
Right. The believer is stepping into a cosmic story that is millennia older than they are. They are physically reenacting these ancient, epic themes of deliverance, threshold crossing, and new creation.
That historical continuity completely changes the scale of the act. It's not just getting dunked in a tank at the front of a room. It leads directly into what the source calls the theology of the plunge.
The plunge, I love that term.
Right. Relying heavily on the Gospel of Matthew and the Apostle Paul's letter to the Romans. Looking at Matthew 28 first, the Great Commission Jesus doesn't frame baptism as a helpful suggestion.
Or a level 2 spiritual accessory for the super committed.
Yeah, exactly. He commands it as the initiating sign of making disciples.
And that command is explicitly Trinitarian. The instruction is to baptize in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
That's a term that gets thrown around a lot in theology, but practically speaking, what does taking on that Trinitarian name actually signify for the person in water?
It's akin to an adoption ceremony. By being baptized into that specific name, the individual is publicly declaring a multifaceted shift in their identity. They're acknowledging that they're adopted by the Father, their life is now united with the life of the Son, and they're internally indwelt by the Spirit.
That's massive.
It's not merely aligning with a philosophy, it's entering a family lineage.
That makes sense logically, but Paul's writings in Romans, specifically chapter 6, push this beyond just taking on a new family name. The argument there is that Paul doesn't use metaphorical language meant to just decorate a nice religious ritual. He describes baptism as active participation. It is embodied theology.
Embodied theology is the perfect phrase for it. It means your physical body is doing the believing, not just your intellect. The physical act is a visceral mirror of a spiritual reality.
The visualization here is incredibly stark. Going under the water is literally a funeral. It represents the death of the old self, the definitive end of calling your own shots, and the burial of sin's dominion over your life. You hold your breath, you go dark, you are submerged.
Yeah.
And then coming up out of the water, gasping for air, is a resurrection. It's a physical enactment of rising to walk in an entirely new life.
Which brings us to perhaps the most fascinating insight in the entire deep dive.
The science part.
Yes, the connection between this ancient theology and modern neuroscience. The material highlights how physically enacting a traumatic or triumphant event like holding your breath, descending into water, feeling the temperature change, and being pulled back up. It anchors that truth deep in the body's somatic memory.
It's like muscle memory for the soul.
Exactly. When you just think about a concept, it stays in the prefrontal cortex. but a full-body physical sensation embeds the event into your corporeal memory.
Wow.
So consider the implications years later. When a person faces moments of severe doubt, grief, or overwhelming temptation, they aren't just trying to close their eyes and recall a fleeting spiritual feeling from a sermon they heard.
They're recalling an event.
A visceral, physical event. They remember the shock of the cold water, the feeling of gravity giving way, the sound of the water rushing in their ears, and the voices of the witnesses when they broke the surface. That embodied memory acts as an unshakable anchor when the intellect is wavering.
It's a brilliant way to bypass the constant fluctuations of our minds and anchor a conviction directly into the biology of the body.
Absolutely.
So, what does this all mean when the rubber meets the road? Because it's easy to talk about beautiful metaphors, but the source does not shy away from the fact that this public declaration comes with a severe real-world cost.
It really does.
Back in the early Roman Empire, standing in a river and publicly confessing Jesus as Lord was not a casual Sunday activity. It was incredibly politically charged.
It was essentially an act of treason.
Right.
The Roman political structure was built on the absolute supremacy of Caesar. By publicly declaring Jesus as Lord, an individual was implicitly and sometimes explicitly denying that Caesar was the ultimate authority.
So, a bit higher stakes than losing a few followers on social media or getting an awkward look at Thanksgiving.
Significantly higher. The historical context shows that this confession carried ruinous social and economic risks. A person could be completely ostracized by their family network.
Cut off. Completely.
Cut off. They could be expelled from the local trade guilds, which immediately ruined their ability to make a living. And in many regions, depending on the local magistrate, it carried mortal risk. Baptism was crossing the Rubicon. It was a line of no return.
Yet despite those terrifying stakes, if you look at the Book of Acts, there is an intense, almost chaotic agency around baptism.
Yeah, I didn't wait around.
People weren't forming committees to study the geopolitical climate and waiting for things to cool down. They were doing it immediately.
The historical accounts highlight this urgency perfectly. At Pentecost, roughly 3,000 people were baptized in a single day, right in the heart of Jerusalem.
3,000. That's a riot waiting to happen in that context.
Exactly. They were risking immediate, severe estrangement from their families and the established religious leaders. Then there's the narrative of the Ethiopian eunuch.
Oh, I love this one.
This is a high-ranking foreign official who is traveling. He hears the gospel explained, sees a random body of water by the side of the road, and demands, "What prevents me from being baptized?" He stops his entire diplomatic convoy to go down into the water right then and there.
No hesitation.
None. Or take the Philippian jailer who's baptized with his entire household in the middle of the night, covered in dust, immediately following a massive earthquake.
The juxtaposition between that ancient, reckless urgency and how we approach commitments today is jarring. What is driving that hesitation now?
What's fascinating here is how the material contrasts that historical bravery with our modern Western sensibilities. Today, our society prizes a highly privatized, unobtrusive brand of spirituality.
You do you, just don't impose it on anyone else.
Right. Faith is perfectly acceptable, applauded even, as long as it remains an internal coping mechanism that doesn't disrupt the status quo.
But the argument is that keeping faith private to protect it actually starves it of oxygen. In today's context, publicly declaring that Christ holds authority above your career ambitions, above cultural norms, and above your own self-interest, that is still a deeply radical countercultural witness.
Definitely.
It totally disrupts the modern dogma that we are the ultimate sovereign rulers of our own lives.
It absolutely does. Now, the material is highly aware that this kind of radical shift creates immense tension, and it intentionally spends time addressing the real, valid hesitations that keep people standing on the dry edge of the pool, so to speak.
Right, the yeah but moments, the imposter syndrome of spirituality.
Yeah.
The first major hesitation identified is the feeling of, I'm just not ready. I need to get my life together, clean up my habits, and become more spiritually mature before I can stand up in front of people.
It's a very common hurdle. But it represents a fundamental misunderstanding of the act itself. The material clarifies that baptism is a response to grace, not a graduation ceremony for achieving spiritual perfection.
A response to grace?
Yes. In all those biblical examples we just discussed, the faith always precedes the perfection. You don't wait until your life is flawless. You are baptized because you recognize your need for rescue. The act of obedience is actually meant to be a catalyst for growth, not the reward for it.
And then there's the second big hesitation, which is more about ecclesiastical tradition. The thought of, I was already baptized as an infant. Does that count? Do I need to do this again?
This is a sensitive area, and the source handles it objectively, noting the different theological traditions without taking a heavy-handed side. It explains the mechanics of both views. Infant baptism is historically viewed as a powerful symbol of God's initiating grace, marking the welcoming of a child into the broader covenant community.
Okay, on the other side.
Believer's baptism, on the other hand, places the emphasis on an individual's conscious personal repentance and their deliberate ownership of the faith.
So, what is the practical advice for someone wrestling with that specific background?
The guidance is highly pastoral. Seek counsel within your specific local church. The material notes that many church traditions fully support and encourage a reaffirmation of faith through believer's baptism. For adults who are baptized as infants but now want to make a conscious public confession of their own volition.
Let's say someone navigates those hesitations and decides they are ready to take the plunge. The source material doesn't just leave them hanging. It provides a very practical, four-part framework for crafting what it calls a pre-baptism testimony.
It's a great tool.
And I love this because it demystifies the process. It's designed to keep the focus on the trajectory of transformation rather than turning into a sensationalized list of past mistakes.
Exactly. It breaks down into 4 clear beats. Step 1 is before. What defined your life, your primary worldview, or your deepest struggles prior to encountering Christ?
Oh, okay.
Step 2 is the encounter. How did the gospel actually become real to you? Was it a single lightning bolt moment, or was it a gradual, creeping realization over years?
Step 3 is after. What tangible transformation has already begun in your desires, your habits, or your priorities?
Right.
And finally, step 4 is the commitment. Why are you choosing to make this definitive public declaration today? It strips away the pressure to be theatrical. You aren't giving a TED Talk. You are simply taking the witness stand to testify to a change of allegiance.
And that concept of the witness stand brings us to the final, crucial element the text insists upon, the witnessing community.
Yes, the audience.
This is not meant to be a solitary religious task performed in a vacuum or a private bathtub.
Why is the audience so critical to the act?
Because baptism is inherently communal. The individual is being baptized into a body of people. The text strongly advises inviting at least one person, a skeptical friend, a family member, a coworker, or a mentor, to physically stand there and watch.
Just to observe.
Well, their presence serves 2 vital functions. First, it fosters relational accountability. Those witnesses can remind the individual of the vows they made when times get difficult. Second, it creates incredibly natural, unforced gospel opportunities for observers who might not share the beliefs, but are watching this profound, vulnerable life moment unfold in real time.
It shifts the entire event from a solitary intellectual exercise into a shared physical covenant celebration.
Yeah.
So to pull all these diverse threads back together, the journey the source material takes us on is remarkably profound. It takes the modern concept of quiet, unobtrusive spirituality and flips it on its head. It frames baptism as the ultimate necessary threshold where a private conviction is forged in the open to become a durable public covenant.
A durable covenant.
Yes, it's an embodied physical muscle memory for the soul of a funeral for the old self-ruled life and a gasping resurrection to an entirely new identity.
This raises an important question, and it's something I want to leave our listener to ponder as we wrap up today.
Let's hear it.
The text talks endlessly about the power of physical memory and water as an element of both chaos and life. If water is universally understood as the very thing humans need to survive, it's essential for life. What does it say about the radical nature of this faith? That its ultimate initiation requires you to hold your breath and symbolically drown in it before you are finally allowed to truly live.
Wow, that is a deeply unsettling but incredibly vital thought to sit with. Holding your breath and symbolically drowning before you can truly live. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you enjoyed exploring the depths of the source material with us today, and we encourage you to keep exploring the profound ways our physical actions shape our deepest identities. Until next time.